Dear WRDSB trustees, staff, and our broader community. My name is Julia Malott, and I stand before you tonight as a WRDSB parent in support of a motion that a trustee has brought forward regarding parental stewardship. I wish to speak to how WRDSB can strengthen their resolve to empower parents to be actively and intimately involved in their child's education. I write a weekly column for the National Post, and my main area of focus is identity politics and how they are playing out on a weekly basis in public institutions across Canada. This work has afforded me many months of keeping close focus on the identity politics divide that has befallen Canadian school boards. Interestingly, just this morning, I published a piece about this very school board and a drawn-out matter that has been involving freedom of speech in your boardroom. But tonight, I would like to share observations on the discussion surrounding parental rights and what's going on here. There is an intuitive sense amongst most Canadians that parents should hold the steering role in a child's ideological upbringing. This isn't radical, but certain school boards have come to behave as though they know better than parents in these ideological matters. I don't love the term parental rights. I find it to be problematic because it can be taken to imply that parents have a right that usurps the right of the child. People sometimes take it to objectify the child, a right to act upon the child. And for this reason, in my writing, I avoid the usage of the term parental rights and instead emphasize what it implies, creating space for parental agency and autonomy in the stewardship of their children. Because this is what it's all about. Who is responsible for steering the ideological direction of our kids? We all know the answer to this intuitively, but we also know it legally. Section 20, Part 2 of the Children's Law Reform Act presumes parents and guardians hold decision-making responsibility for their children when it comes to health, education, culture, and religion. It states that a person is entitled to decision-making responsibility with respect to their child and must exercise those rights and responsibilities in the best interest of the child. Only when a court of law establishes that a given parent has proven unable or unwilling to champion the best interests of their child is this principle set aside. In the work that I do, certain school boards come up again and again. Unlike the education system of the 80s and 90s that recognized Canada's strength in diversity of thought, we are increasingly seeing school boards such as the WRDSB behave as though their role is not to partner with parents in the education of young minds, but instead to protect children from parents whose ideas might be unpalatable to the perspectives of the individuals running the education monolith. This is not diversity of thought, it is homogeneity of thought. But in school boards in Ontario today, this board inclusive, we see partisan social justice matters being taken into their own hands when they conduct their business. This is not in alignment with liberalism, but this is a narrow interpretation of how society ought to be. And that ought might be amiable. Sometimes I agree. It might be the same world that I wish to see enacted. But when ought comes into the discussion, it is a matter of opinion. It can be disagreed upon. It, by definition, is ideology. We can teach what different people think. We should teach what different people think. We should expose children to diverse ideals. But too often today, we are teaching children what to think on ideological matters that are known to be controversial within the diverse populations of this multicultural country. Doing this diminishes diversity of thought for our learners, and it creates an antimonious relationship between schools and parents. Parents who sometimes have rigid ideological perspectives rooted in cultural and religious traditions. Some of those views might be unpalatable, but families in Canada are entitled to these beliefs. Some of these beliefs are overtly hostile to me as a transgender individual, but families in Canada are entitled to these beliefs. That's actually their right. It's their right to instruct their children in those beliefs. That's how private family life works. Having spent thousands of hours in conversation with parents, students, trustees, city councillors, and politicians at both the provincial and federal levels, I've come to get a pretty good sense of the diverse perspectives on this matter. I've spoken with families of all kinds of beliefs, including many who are admittedly uncomfortable with the concept of, say, a transgender person such as myself. But what I've also learned is that for most Canadians, even most who protest and speak up in these meetings about parental rights, it is not about forcing their personal views into the education system. It is about an observable concern that in the education system today, the views of the system are being forced into the minds of their children. Liberalism matters. It is a political and social philosophy, and it promotes individual rights of liberty, civil liberty, democratic practices, and a willingness to respect or accept behaviors of opinions different from one's own. This is the hallmark of Canadian democracy. I'd like to share an excerpt of an opinion editorial I published in the National Post in October of this year. This piece was a reflection of the parental rights protests that had taken place at the end of September across Canada. I think it highlights where some of the parents are feeling that their agency with their children are slipping away. The demand for broader recognition of parental rights has arisen so strongly today because, until quite recently, the stewarding role of parents was indisputable, only to be overstepped in the most extreme instances of abuse or neglect. This is a little surprise. The parent, having been present from day one, knows a thing or two about the nuances of their kid. It is therefore disturbing that some commentators have so quickly dismissed the long-standing tradition of parental stewardship. Canada has long held that parents have an important role that spans beyond catering to the physical needs of their offspring. The parental role is one of nurturing a child's emotional development and guiding the child through the complexities of modern life. The process is not intended to instruct a child on what to do, but also on how to live with virtue, a subjective standard. It's that responsibility of instilling values that separates parents from the role of, say, a babysitter. It's also what separates them from the role of a school board and a teacher. Child rearing is undeniably linked to the transmission of ideological belief. While the term ideology has gained a negative connotation, at its core, the term simply means to refer to a structure of set beliefs or values that shape one's interpretation of what is good and bad. Principles such as sharing is virtuous or lying is wrong, for example, are both ideologically rooted, even if they're not particularly controversial. But in education, there has been a long-standing practice of steering clear of endorsing a specific ideology, religious creed, political affiliation, or position on subjects like vaccines and abortion, for instance. Rather than prescribing these beliefs, Canada's pluralistic system is set up to teach students how to think critically while deferring to parents in domains where disagreement is commonplace. But today, some are suggesting that a teacher who corrals 30 kids for a few months is better positioned to meet children's needs than their parents. The result is an insulting tendency to intervene in a child's education without parental involvement. The education system today sees its role as counteracting bad ideological precepts that a child may learn at home. For decades, we've embraced the diverse familiar traditions make Canada strong, and that a functioning pluralistic system allows for differences of opinion between families. Only recently has the dogmatism of social justice recast diverse parental values as a threat to the right of the child. In an era where visible diversity of ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender expression are applauded voraciously, diversity of ideology has been derided as wholly unacceptable. Canadian households have noticed this erosion, recognizing that it reduces a parent's role in guiding the ideological development of their children to one of sustaining only their physical needs. This warps the institution of parental stewardship and recasts parents as babysitters with all the responsibility and none of the reward. So what can we do here in Waterloo Region? We don't need to change very much. This board's education system is good for the most part, but we do need to be careful. We need to be thoughtful and considerate of the diversity of belief that our students and their families have, and be careful to set an educational standard that avoids controversial ideologies as much as possible. And we need a definition of those bounds of agency and autonomy for parents as it pertains to education. The Child Reform Act is a good starting place, but it's admittedly vague and incomplete. We would do well to have robust legislation that lay clear the bounds between parents and schools boards when it comes to ideological matters. Enshrining this is smart. It might protect parents, but it also protects this institution. It would go a long way to reducing the tension so frequently felt in this school board in recent months, and would lay clear where the line between school purview and parents has been crossed. I'll remind you, a regulation that sets the bounds of parental agency and autonomy would lay out where a parent's rights exist, but it would also lay out where they do not. This is a win-win for all involved. Perhaps it would save a lawsuit or two. We could do this. We should do this. And I believe Trustee Watson's motion to raise this to the Minister of Education is an excellent start down that pathway. Thank you.